Since my last video on Irelia's E did so well, I decided that I would make a second Irelia guide just in time for Season 11. But this time I'll go over mechanics you might not know of for all of her abilities. I'll be going over each ability one by one, starting with her autos, then her passive, and then I'll talk about her different abilities. Timestamps will be in the description if you want to skip around to only parts you're interested in. Irelia's autos are unique for two reasons. The first is that the auto actually does damage before the animation finishes. This means you can cancel her autos early, speeding up your DPS if you have a higher APM. Her autos can also be animation cancelled with her Q, essentially allowing you to deal damage twice at the same exact time. When auto attacking as Irelia, there are a few things you need to be aware of. The first is that since Irelia is a high attack speed and mobile champion, you never want to be standing still. You should always be trying to move to reposition, stay in auto attack range, and dodge abilities. She also has a super far auto attack range, 200 units, which is one of the highest for a melee champion. The better you are at utilizing this range and abusing other champions' short auto range, the better Irelia player you will be. You can also abuse both of these alongside with your Q to keep a perfect distance away from the enemy to kite them where you stay out of their auto range, but inside yours. This is very difficult though. Irelia's passive is the most important thing to think about, especially during the early game when you're taking fights. At 5 stacks, you gain 50% attack speed and bonus on-hit magic damage. You can see how many stacks you are at under your mana bar, and you can also see it alongside a timer above your abilities. You get 1 stack per enemy hit with an ability. The timer refreshes every time you use an ability that hits an enemy, or every time you auto-attack a champion or large monster. You should always be considering how many stacks you have and how much longer you have them, and most importantly, a way to keep your stacks. Irelia's Q is her signature ability that allows her to make outplays and flashy pentakills, so you need to be able to utilize it. Luckily, it's not that difficult. The first important mechanic you need to know is that you can ability Q her Q. Basically, that means you can tell the game that you want to Q before you are able to Q, and the game will automatically use it when it's available. This mechanic alone is the reason why you want to play with your camera unlocked. Be careful when you're doing this because if you try to use another spell or right click, it will cancel the ability Q. It's also important to note that your Q will always put you behind the enemy. This is useful when trying to dodge skill shots. You can also buffer your Q with flash. If you hit Q on an outer range target and then flash into range, it will instantly Q to the target and even look pretty flashy. You can Q over the wall to most jungle monsters from certain angles if you have vision. All of these spots work on both sides of the map except for the red side rafters. On the right side you can only Q to the small raptor, which still helps you escape, but you aren't able to mark the small raptor, so ultimately it's a worse wall jump than the blue side rafters. You are able to Q as your W is shooting out its final damage. This is really useful when you are trying to use W to set up low minions or when you are trying to quickly burst an enemy. Right clicking an enemy as you are mid Q to them will guarantee an auto on the enemy as soon as your Q finishes. If you just Q to them with no right click, Irelia will just stand there. When tower diving a low enemy, it's better to flash auto Q so you can Q out to minions than to Q auto flash out. When you flash first, you get a maximum of auto Q auto damage off in a quick amount of time, and you also have a high possibility of resetting your Q. But just Qing them under tower and then autoing will only get 1 auto off and no escape other than flash, which doesn't heal you like your Q does. But generally this is pretty situational, so it's just something to think about. The most basic thing about her W that you need to know is that it can't be cancelled and it blocks 50% of all physical damage, including tower shots. Knowing this, you should plan to use your W in teamfights before a heavy AD burst ability like Qiyana R or Yasuo R. Since it can't be cancelled, you are impossible to burst down from these abilities. The next 2 intermediate things you should know about her W is that it is a great way to set up minions to Q to. You only need to hold W for 0.75 seconds before it deals a maximum amount of damage. It also makes a noise and the animation slightly changes after the 0.75 seconds. Typically after hitting your full W damage onto caster minions, you will be able to finish them off with a Q. This can be useful for engaging quickly onto your laner or even just getting an escape. The next thing you should know about her W is that you get a passive stack per enemy hit. So if you are in the jungle with no passive stacks and you potentially can hit 2 people with your W, you should try to do that rather than reduce damage with your W. Having a fully stacked passive is way better than reducing some damage in a skirmish. The last 2 mechanics are a bit more advanced and are actually the reason I wanted to make this video. So if there's one thing I want you to take away from this video, it's that your W can be used to extend your passive duration for about 2 seconds after it would normally expire. If you watch the timer on your stats bar, you can start channeling W right as it's about to run out, and you can see your passive continuously refreshing. If you successfully hit an enemy with your W, you will keep all your stacks, but if you miss, you will lose your passive. This is really useful for keeping your passive up while waiting for the next wave. Having your passive up as the next wave arrives is extremely useful and will get you many solo kills. The last mechanic isn't as useful, but is fun to style on low HP enemies with. You can flash buffer your W by spamming flash as you release it, extending the range. It might be a bit hard at first to get the hang of. I'd recommend spamming right click in the direction you're going to flash in, as it makes it a lot easier for some reason. I've already made a video on Irelia's E mechanics, and I don't want to repeat information, so if you're interested, I'll have a link in the description and also on the top right of the video, but there's a few things I forgot to mention in that video. One thing that I forgot to mention was that you can use Irelia's E to gain vision of enemies and, more importantly, jungle monsters over walls so that you can dash to them. This is really useful for escapes, especially when split pushing top lane. You can easily queue over to Gromp for a quick escape. If you ever find yourself in a jungle fight and you are short a few passive stacks, try to land your E on both the jungle monster and the enemy champion you are fighting. That way you can get one extra Q stack from the marked monster, which means extra healing, extra mobility, extra passive stack, and also if you Q to the enemy champion, there's a good chance that monster might attack them instead of you. Using the EWE mechanic I showed in the other video is a great way of breaking spell shields. The W will always hit before the E, even though they look like they hit at the same time, so it'll break the spell shield and then instantly stun the enemy. This is useful against champions like Malzahar, Nocturne, and Sivir, plus any other champion who builds Banshees or Edge of Night. Lastly, a really clean looking and useful way to triple Q someone is to throw out your E about half a second before you Q to the target. This will stun the target right as you get on top of them, allowing you to Q 3 times in total. This is especially useful when diving champions who can CC you if you get too close to them, like Lissandra R or Quinn E. Irelia's R is a big playmaking ability for her. It's the entire reason she has a good team fight, and there aren't too many mechanics you need to know for this one, but there are a few good things to know. The only thing you need to know about her R is that you can flash buffer it. If you hit R and then flash during the channel, you can move the ult with you as you flash, increasing the range and allowing you to catch your opponent's off guard. You can do this in any direction. Although it's very niche, you can also flash without the ult if you time it correctly so that it doesn't come with you. This can be used to dodge abilities or land your R for the slow and flash out. One thing that most people don't know about her ult is that you can actually get 2 passive stacks from it with one enemy. If you hit the enemy with the actual ult, you get 1 stack, and if they walk into the blades, you get another stack. This will probably never actually matter, but it's still a good thing to know. Lastly, the ult projectile deals damage and marks large monsters when it passes through them, even if it doesn't hit a champion. You can use this to your advantage if you're going for a max range ult, and you can Q to the monster/minions it passes through to quickly close the gap. And as a final tip, hitting any minions with your R will basically always set them up for you to Q to them. If you enjoyed the video, please consider subscribing and following my Twitch. I don't currently stream, but I plan on streaming this next season, so if you're interested in watching, I'd really appreciate it. My Twitch is Eskimo2 and will be linked in the description. Thank you for watching.